Imagine trying to learn mathematics or science in a language you barely understand. Even the brightest learner would struggle. When children begin learning in familiar languages, teachers spend less time translating and more time teaching. Children participate more confidently, ask more questions, and develop stronger conceptual understanding. So the question is not whether African children can learn. The question is whether our education systems fully build upon the knowledge, languages, and experiences African children already bring with them. Fortunately, this is no longer a debate driven by opinion. We now have more than 5 decades of international research supported by UNESCO and numerous global studies showing remarkably consistent findings. For over 70 years, UNESCO has recognized that children learn best through their mother tongue during the early years because it supports understanding, strengthens identity, and accelerates learning. More recently, the Global Education Evidence Advisory Panel identifies structured teaching combined with instruction in familiar languages as among the most effective investments countries can make to improve learning outcomes. Why does this approach work so well? First, children learn stronger literacy, numeracy, and foundations because they understand what is being taught rather than memorizing unfamiliar words. Second, learning first in a familiar language makes it easier, not harder, to acquire additional languages, such as English, French, or Portuguese. Strong first language literacy translates into second language learning. Third, children become more motivated and remain in school longer because they experience the early success instead of repeated frustration. Finally, multilingual education strengthens partnerships between schools, families, and communities. Parents can support learning when they understand the language used in the classroom, making education a shared responsibility. But perhaps the most striking finding is that these results are consistent across different countries, languages, and education systems. The evidence is no longer asking whether multilingual foundational learning works. It is asking whether we are prepared to act on what we already know. The encouraging news is that this is no longer a simple research question. Countries across Africa are demonstrating that multilingual foundational learning can be successfully implemented at scale. Senegal provides an important example of how governments can integrate national languages into foundational learning. Successful implementation depends on combining language policy with high-quality reading instruction. Effective reading programs consistently include 6 essential components: oral language development, phonological awareness, phonics, reading fluency, reading comprehension, and writing. When these elements are taught systematically in languages children understand, learning accelerates. Success almost depends on practical implementation. Well-prepared teachers, quality teaching and learning materials, supportive curriculum and assessment systems, sustained political leadership, and strong collaboration between governments, researchers, development partners. The important message is that we already know what works. Our challenge is no longer discovering solutions. Our challenge is scaling them. To conclude, I would like to suggest that we change the narrative. Instead of saying Africa has a foundational learning crisis, let us instead say Africa has the knowledge, the evidence, the talent, and the examples needed to transform foundational learning. The question before us is not whether multilingual foundational learning is possible. The question is how quickly we can make it the norm rather than the exception. I therefore invite all of us to become champions for multilingual foundational learning. Let us scale approaches that we know work, learn from one another's experiences, invest in teachers and high-quality learning materials, and ensure that language is recognized as a central pillar of education reform rather than an afterthought. If we do this, we will come much closer to ensuring that every African child begins school with confidence, learns with understanding, and acquires the strong foundation needed for lifelong learning. Together, we have an opportunity and indeed a responsibility to ensure that every African child begins their educational journey in a language understanding, giving them the strongest possible foundation for learning, opportunity, and success. Thank you very much.